Visiting some of the properties, I mean, a good portion of Centennial Square is being redeveloped with the King Supers that's there, and that's an Englewood
Yes.
project, so.
Yeah, the south half is not
Right.
entirely the south half. They have proceeded. And that's an Englewood.
Right. Broadway Square issue, that's the one with the light and the cut with the bowling alley and that. What's the challenge with the Wells Fargo, or is it related to?
I think the biggest issue is just getting all the property owners to agree to redevelop that site. You know, our last contact was over 3 years ago with those folks, and who knows what's changed since then. But given the, depending on what direction you give us to go, if you tell us to wade back into that, we would re-contact everyone, update that information.
Now, Broadridge, that's another out-of-state owner. Any other complications with that?
They are not out of state. That's Transmark. They're in the state.
Okay.
They're not huge complications with that. There's actually some activity going on with that, but it's confidential at this point.
Okay. And then Broadway Estates?
Broadway Estates is owned by the church. That is one of the problem sites we looked at there. As you know, Hyundai redeveloped that front portion.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a little island of Arapahoe County in there for a long time. It was completely surrounded by cities, but I think that's all. Did it all go to Centennial?
We got it from Centennial.
Okay. We ended up with... got one, Bruce. We got that. Bruce. If it's okay with you, Bruce Dahlman, I'm going to start just to stay on time.
Please.
Okay. And I apologize. I'm talking about it.
While Bruce and Michael are caucusing, you might want to introduce Jeff.
Good point. This is Jeff Holwell, who is with the South Metro Denver Chamber, runs their economic development operation. Jeff has come full circle because that's where I met him years and years ago. Jeff has had this illustrious career, worked at the state and ran the state economic development operation for more than one administration. I know you got into
Six and a half years.
another party 6.5 years down there. And we have a long history, know Jeff well. Want to say anything?
I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. Thank you for having me here. Phil is our appointee to the Economic Development Group, which meets monthly, as well as is involved in the economic development activities throughout South Metro Denver. In particular, the city of Littleton is has a contract with the EDG to do very specific economic development activities. I'm sure Chris will touch on that tonight. I'm happy to jump in on the process in the meeting.
Good point.
Mayor, there is a fundraising event happening tonight at the Chamber, and you'll be pleased to know that one of the items that you've been put up for, be it a raft trip down the river, is going very well. I think one of our board members is going to win it, but that closes at 8:30, so thank you for donating.
Thank you.
Doug, I hope you hear me. I think my mic is on, so I'm going to start. I'm going to just bring down these front lights. I think you're still going to be able to see. I wanted to start with just kind of a way to think about what economic development is, because this is going to drive a lot of the discussion as we go through this. This is part of a presentation that I actually give across the country a lot. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I'm going to pull out about 10, 12 slides here. So I call it Local Economy 101, and if you would stop and think about it, this is what an economy is. It's simply the act of trading with each other. We all specialize in something. There's probably a few people that live in caves and make their own food and grow their own food, make their own clothes, that sort of thing. But all the rest of us specialize something and we trade with things. So most of the carpet in this country is made in Dalton, Georgia. Most of the RVs are made in Elkhart, Indiana, and general aviation, Wichita, and petroleum in Houston, films in LA, cars in Detroit, on and on and on. Most people would recognize that. So if that's the case, let's just see what would happen, how if we were to build a town from scratch. What does the economy look like as it starts to build? We go out on the eastern plains, not a tree, not a person in sight out there, and let's start a new town. We'd have to think up some specialization so we could trade with the world. Well, let's say the iPod had not been invented, and we thought it up. So we build this factory out there, and right now, that's our town, that factory. I work there, but I live in Denver. I'm driving out there every day to go to work. But whatever it is we make in there, we're sending out of town, we're exporting it out of town, and that's bringing money back into our town. So here's a way to think about it. You can think about it in any city, and that is you stand at the edge of town. Whatever's on the truck that's leaving town is bringing money back into that town. So primary jobs ship things out of town. I get tired of driving out there every day, so I make this decision that, hey, hon, let's go build a house out there, and we do. And some of the other people working there at that factory, they build houses. So pretty soon, our town now has two things. It's got that factory, it's got a bunch of residential people out there. But I'm still driving back to Denver to eat and buy groceries and that sort of thing, and somebody out there says, you know what, I'm going to put in a restaurant. So they open up, and now instead of driving an hour and a half to Denver, I go down and I eat there. So now our town's got three things. It's got those primary jobs bringing money into town. It went to those residents. It now goes to local businesses. If you were just to diagram this, money coming in from the left goes to those primary jobs, goes to residential, goes to local business, government, then taxes, those people, they provide services, water, streets, fire, that sort of stuff. Charity would be out on the end, and it asks for money all up and down that chain. But money's coming in for that left-hand side and flowing down through those various boxes. This is super important as we get to talking about what it is we're going to actually do in town. So let's do a little recap. Primary or exporting jobs determine the wealth of a community. The reason Littleton's fairly wealthy is we export high-value things. We're probably twice as wealthy as Lyman, which exports natural resources out there. Wealth flows down that chain. Retail does not create wealth. It distributes it. And then government and charities are out on the end of the chain. So I want to just jump to here because this is a key thing about commodity pressures. Let's say that's my business on the left-hand side, and there's my selling price, the big bar, next to it's my expenses. I've got a profit margin in it. Let's say we're selling gas, something that's a real commodity. You just can't differentiate. We both got clean bathrooms, and there's a station across the street. We both got the exact same gas. And so there's my competitor sitting across the street, and today I don't know what the gas prices today. They're going up so fast, $3.50, $3.60. So I'm selling it for $3.60 a gallon, and across the street, there's my competitor selling for less than me, for, say, $3.40. And for whatever reason, he's got a smaller expenses in there, so he's got a profit. So what have I got to do? Well, I've got to get my prices down lower than him. But if I do this, my revenue stream is now less than my expense stream. So I got to go, well, I got to get my expenses down. So, I lay off people, I pay people less, I put in software, I do all kinds of efficiency things. But the essence of it is I now have my expenses down, and I am still making a profit, and all those people that were turning into that gas station yesterday because it had lower prices are now turning into my gas stations because I got to go lower prices. Now, let's go across the street. What's that guy got to do? He's got to get his expenses down. He's got to get his revenue down. What have I got to do? You can see what this does. This is called a commodity trap. Nobody wants to do this. But if you've got a commodity where you can't make any difference in what it is that you're selling, gasoline, salt, something, most retail items, then you're caught in a commodity trap, and you don't have any choice. It's kind of like an arms race. It's like, I don't want to be driving into the ground. The other guy doesn't want it to be driven into the ground, but neither one of us can figure out how to get out of this. So that's a key factor, and I want to, let's see, somewhere in here, get the screen up. I want to talk about what that's going to mean then as we go through this. If you will, in your books, hopefully it's a dark blue page, which would be the second tab back. There are 2 pages in there. If you go to the second page, it should look like a little bar graph that's like this. The key thing here is this data is Dun & Bradstreet data. It is for the state of Colorado. It is the chart, the graph I want you to pay attention to is in the upper right-hand corner. So this data is Colorado 2000 to 2008. The 3 bars we have here, the first bar is if you took all the businesses open in Colorado, subtracted all the businesses that closed, you will see that's a negative number. There was actually jobs lost in this case. The second bar is if you would take all the businesses that expanded, subtract all the businesses that contracted, it's that very large bar. Lots and lots of jobs were created in Colorado using that method. The third one is if you take all the businesses that relocated into Colorado, that were recruited here, and subtract all the businesses that left Colorado, it's this bar which hardly is even worth looking at. It actually happens to be a very small negative number, but it doesn't really make any difference because most of the activity is not taking place on this. This is a free site called youreconomy.org. If you would go in and look at state after state, metro area after metro area, you're going to see virtually that exact same pattern. Here's the point I'm trying to make is that growth in almost every area occurs in expansion of existing companies. So let me turn the projector power off. Ooh, it worked. And turn the lights back up. Here's that exact same diagram that I showed you in there as to how money flows down. So money coming from primary jobs comes from 2 places. It's either going to come from businesses that are recruited in. As you can see, that number is so small it just doesn't hardly register on there. Or it's going to come from local companies that are growing. The average person on the street, I think, sees economic development as something way down here. They're going to see it as a Main Street project, as a redevelopment project, as an urban renewal project. Sometimes you get buy local campaigns, shop local, local foods, tourism, marketing, on and on and on. Those things are all about this box. Those are important things. Those things need to be done. That box is important. But that box doesn't exist without this box. You can turn off this box, everything dies down there. You can turn off that box. I mean, it's kind of clunky. You wouldn't have local retail, but the system still works out there. So if you're out on the street and you say, well, what is economic development? Usually people are going to spot something that's new development. You're going to see that construction we saw down on Mineral, and we get calls all the time. So what is this? What's going in there? Sometimes you'll see new stores happening in retail areas. Sometimes you'll see new development down on Main Street, that sort of stuff. But out with what it calls civilians, out on people just on the street, if you talk about economic development, it usually tends to be in that area right there. The point I would like to make is don't ever take your eyes off of that box, because the money coming in, if you just think of this as water flowing down a pipe, it comes in here. Down here, it gets passed around between all these various retail areas down there.
That's what Ken Bacon said when we asked him
About the manufacturing, yeah.
That's
The only thing that I would say about his comment, and he made the exact same point, manufacturing is usually a primary job. In Littleton, there's very little manufacturing. But the key to it is that these people sell outside the community. And manufacturing is one of the ways to do it, but the manufacturing places in the United States are all hurting. So this is the Rust Belt in the Midwest because those are commodity industries. You can do that stuff anywhere in the world. And as a matter of fact, most of them are going the rest of the world to do that sort of stuff. So what we keep our eyes on all the time is do high value added jobs, so these are specialized niches, and ship them out of the community. You solve this problem, then we got the ability to come down here and work on these other problems. Any other questions at this point?
Well, primary jobs in Littleton can be creation of software.
Absolutely. In fact, that's what it's likely to be.
And it can be actually engineering solutions.
Yep. If you work in Taiwan, like
So
Yeah.
primary jobs are not just manufacturing.
No.
You can say it is manufacturing, but there's components of that primary job that aren't necessarily applied locally, where revenue is brought in for services that are provided on a broader scale.
That's exactly the point, is that if it's bringing money in, it's a primary job. It doesn't matter the industry. There are, all kinds of possibilities, things that bring money in. You can be a consultant and go out and bring money in. Actually, tourism coming in from the outside is a primary money, because it's money coming in from the outside. So it's not just manufacturing, as Phil said, can be all kinds of things.
And Chris, just maybe you know and maybe you don't know. Looking back at the Dun and Bradstreet numbers, overall, not going to argue with them. However, when does a business become a local business? When you're looking at the expanded versus contracted, when does a business get to the point where it may have been imported at some point in time, but now it's been local for so long?
It's a really good question that I don't know the answer, but I can also tell you is that importing is such a small number that it just doesn't hardly register.
Yeah, but
so if you would say, let's just say this was the chart this year, and we advance it next year, and all of these people that were coming in town are now local and expanded, it's a piddling number.
Yeah, well, let me cover an example. There's a business that's in Centennial that has most of their manufacturing occurs in primarily China. But they relocated the engineering side of what they do from California to Centennial.
Mm-hmm.
That was done maybe about 2 years ago.
Right.
They brought in, I think, 4 people from the West Coast, but they've hired 35 folks locally. Is that imported or expanded?
I don't know how Dun & Bradstreet did it, but I can tell you that 35 over the total number of jobs created in Centennial is going to be a .00 something.
Yeah, but if you multiply some of that, a business that's, the concept comes in, the entrepreneur comes in, but yet develops local jobs at a multiple scale of the number of folks that have essentially been imported with the entrepreneur, sounds pretty attractive too.
Yeah. Short answer is I don't know. I don't know how they calculate that. Yes.
I have a question for you. So the primary jobs conversation, it a lot of gray, but I guess out of you know how many jobs there are in the city, because you track the unemployment rate, so you guys understand that. So I mean, how many jobs within the city of Littleton would you say are quote unquote primary jobs?
The general rule of thumb is a primary job will generate somewhere between 2 and 3 secondary jobs out there. So if we've got about 2,000 businesses in town, and you say a third of them are primary, what is it, 7, 6, 8?
Average,
like
what,
yeah.
5 employees or 6 employees apiece?
For a primary job?
Well, no, per business on average.
Yeah, these are called also stage 2 jobs and stage 1 jobs. Stage 1 companies are 1 to 10 employees. On the average, this kind of company will add 1.5 jobs growth per company. On the average, most people will add about 23 jobs. This is a nationwide average.
Okay.
So it varies. If you say 5 jobs, I'm going, well, are you talking about these retail folks, or are you talking about the people down in South Park? These people have much higher, and these are better paying jobs, too. A retail job might pay $10 a square foot with no benefits.
Well, see, in South Park, you're basically, so some of them, you'd say healthcare, for example, would be quote unquote a primary job.
Yeah, if it brings money in from the outside.
Okay. But I guess if to your point, you're saying keep your eye on, never take your eye off primary jobs. So the implication there is theoretically what we're then doing in terms of connecting the dots between some of these redevelopment opportunities or business expansion opportunities or empty parcels is to sort of think in terms of quote unquote primary jobs.
Yes, if you talk about those parcels that are down in South Park, So you got two ways that's feeding this. But as we go through this, and if you've read the material, you're going to know that this is a pretty
Right.
poor way of getting there.
Right.
And I'm going to show you the data. It's not
Yeah.
my data. It's
No, I
Metro
understand.
Denver's data.
But our government revenue source
It-
is in local businesses.
Absolutely. And that's the reason you don't ever ignore it, because our siphon into the water flowing down through there comes from here. And it does no good to generate a bunch of money up here and then have that retail locate on the outside of the city limit. That's why cities get into fights over big retail.
Exactly. And being part of a metroplex, those primary jobs, those folks who bring the money in have choices about where they're going to spend it in local businesses.
They do.
So
And
that's-
a lot of
that's
that
part of our
depends
issue.
on where they live.
So this is going to end up being a conversation about big box retail?
No. This is going to be a what is, and then it's your discussion as to what it should be.
Well, this is going to sound silly, but I'll ask it anyway. If we didn't tax any local businesses, it wouldn't matter to us whether we had them.
If we didn't tax them,
I mean, except
from the
we need-
city's revenue standpoint, no. I mean, from a community standpoint, you want print shops and barbers
Well,
and
no, and I
gift shops.
understand that, but in terms of surviving
Right,
otherwise.
but
To
what is it?
provide
60% of our revenue comes from, it actually comes from tax here and tax on the equipment back here.
Yeah, and I mean, we want to provide services to the residents and the businesses and
Sure.
whatever, so we have to get money from somewhere.
Yep, exactly. So it flows, the reality is we tax all three of these, and so all three of these would flow into here, and then the services, streets, police, fire, all the things that we do, then come back to these people. Okay, so let me then talk on your third tab just about some basic facts about Littleton's economy. These first 2 or 3 pages are the same ones that I presented when we had the large company breakfast, so you've seen all this data. But for the TV crowd, let me just summarize these one sentence per. Sales and use tax is up 2011 over 2010. The 2012 trends, particularly in motor vehicles, are up about 13.8. I think I heard a story the other night that nationwide it's up about 17%. So the good news is things are ticking back up.
Motor vehicles nationwide are up 17%?
Yes. The business opening and closings, 199 open, believe this, in the heart of the recession, 46 closed.
Chris, how many is you inventory or not? How many total businesses does Littleton have?
We've got about 2,000.
And do you have an idea how many of the ones that opened might be in the one that's closed?
We can go calculate that. We used to keep track of that every year. Did they make it a year out there? It's going to be a mixed answer in there. I don't know, maybe 15 of those that open might have closed or something like that.
Okay.
There's some churn, and that happens.
So what is it that you use to determine that they're a business?
If they file a business license, we don't have a business license, we have a business registration upstairs.
So if they don't, then they're just not counted?
Yes, although we try to find everybody. Anybody that comes through our department or sales tax, they all make it on the list. But also fire department, there's other people that keep track of businesses that are out there. So we're pretty good. We probably don't catch everybody, but it's not a very big percentage, maybe 1-2%, I would say.
So that 2,000, are you counting home businesses or just
Yes, I
brick and
believe that's
mortar?
got the home businesses in there. The new development, even though it's been tough, in 2011, we still had some things being built out there, particularly Hilltop Vistas, which is down there by the motorcycle shop of Harley-Davidson. Littleton Care and Rehab Center on South Lowell Way was an expansion over there by Skate City. McDonald's, I think most people know, over here on Santa Fe. CarMax bringing in, Denver Seminary put in a coffee shop, excuse me. Unemployment rates, I know the audience can't see this, but we're looking at a chart that looks like this. The chart behind that's running high is the U.S. It ran anywhere from the high 9s to about 8%. The red line is Colorado, which is less than the U.S., But the green at the bottom is actually Littleton, and every month we ran less than the U.S. and the state. We typically ran about 2% less. I looked up Inglewood's unemployment rate, and I believe it's setting at 9% today, and ours is about 6.8, 6.9, I think it is. Foreclosure rates, we have less foreclosures in core Littleton than Colorado Arapahoe County. I think a lot of that has to do with the age of the people living here. Most people, not most, but a lot of people have paid their homes off, so they weren't really caught up in the whole mortgage issue. The one that is of interest to us is the job creation rate, and that is this chart, which shows that if it's a red block, then the number of jobs in this community went down from the previous year. If it's a green block, the number of jobs that went up, and you can see it's kind of speckled through there, towns having various kinds of things. The one city in the metro area in which jobs went up every year was Littleton. And again, it goes back to the companies we saw that are doing worldwide work and doing high-end, high-value. It relates back to the core strategy that we have had over all these years about where we put our resources, where the payoff is, what keeps us stable and healthy.
Chris, don't jump over that so fast.
Yes?
So not only, if I'm reading this right, we went up every year, but even the ones that did go up,
A lot of them did
of
not
the
get back
others,
to their...
they were lower in 2011 than they were.
Yeah, probably half of them did not, even though they went up in 2011, did not get back to, the first one is Arvada. In 2006, they had 25,000 plus. In 2011, even though it's green, they had 23,000. So you can see they're still not back to where they were in 2006.
I think that's true of almost all of them, not quite, but certainly back to 2007 it's
Yeah.
true.
Chris, where did these facts come from?
This is what's called QCEW, which is Quarterly Census of Wages and Employment, which is the U.S. Department of Labor, which then goes to the State Department of Labor. These are third-party numbers. We don't generate these.
And they correctly identify the jurisdictional boundaries for these cities?
They actually had a small mistake. Eric had to go through, and we took all the addresses, and on his GIS system, it will tell you what's actually in the real city. There was a small correction that he made to adjust all these numbers based upon the real city limit boundaries.
So, Chris, if we just did a quick math, 2,000 businesses, just shy of 30,000 jobs, would say that a business in Littleton is 14 to 15.
Yeah. If you added everything together,
And that ranges from CenturyLink at about 3,000
right.
or so, which
24.
represents 10% of our
Right.
employment base.
Yeah, but what we know is it will always be I am without a chart, but it will always be a 80-20 rule. There are a few that make a lot of difference and a lot that make a little bit of difference. CenturyLink, EchoStar, and the hospital are our three largest employers. Hospital is about 1,000. Quest, I think, is around 15, 16. I'm not Quest, but EchoStar, 15, 16, and then CenturyLink, depending on. And I asked that question down there 3 times, if you remember.
I remember.
Never gave us a straight answer. So those are the 3 largest employers. Yes. So the next page then is just some demographic trends. I think most people know this. This is just ethnicity, and again, the chart will show that we actually broke it out into white, Hispanic, and then other races. We have gone from 94.3% white in 1980 to 81% in 2010. These, I think most people know, we have a lot of immigrants that have moved into town, particularly the northeast neighborhood. It's not to say this is a bad, this is to say the demographics changing out there and how the economy gets run needs to reflect that. The page behind that is median age, and we are one of the oldest median age communities in the nation, in the country, metro area.
So you said something that was sort of interesting. There are a handful of Hispanic-focused businesses, if you will, particularly in the Littleton Boulevard corridor.
Yes.
But are there specific attributes, is there, I think you made the comment that as the ethnicity changes, there's maybe, the implication was there's some alterations in how jobs revolve around that change.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the implication, I guess, other than there, might be predominantly Spanish speaking, for the sake of an argument, businesses that immigrants, who I'm going to assume for the sake of an argument are Hispanic, predominantly are, and I know they're not, are frequenting.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much about the race or the ethnicity as it is the income level, the education level of people moving in. So you've got people more likely to participate in commodity jobs. And particularly with immigrants who come in, and English is kind of a barrier, and they're trying to learn English as fast as they can.
Sure.
I think that class is full all the time, but that's always a barrier to getting good jobs. We have had stories of people who had been engineers, in
Right.
some country, and they come here and they're working as a janitor.
Right.
Well, part of it is language, and part of it is getting your credentials certified. So it's
But
more
that
of
changes
those kinds
over
of
time,
issues.
of course, that people will migrate up.
Yeah, you assume, and the
Yeah.
sort of the American story is
Right,
the
right,
parents
right.
come in, the children do better, and
So forth.
by the time you get to me, my Irish great-grandfather, who probably couldn't get a job.
Right.
It's also true to say that historically that's what's happened with us, but now the trend is slowed down quite a bit to some
The trend for moving up the
right
American
assimilating.
dream kind of thing. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't seen data that that's the case, but
No, according to
some
the books
kind
I'm reading,
according to who?
information I've read.
Okay. The next page, just the revenue outlook. The point that I want to make here is if you'll look at the year about 2000, 2001, revenue in Littleton ran virtually flat for, 6, 7 years. You see that little peak that went up there? That's Lowe's coming online, and this Riverside Downs Shopping Center across the river coming online. You cannot make a peak like that with a small retail shop at a time. They're going to produce about 5,000 to 6,000. Lowe's or Home Depot's will produce 1 million, 1.2 million, somewhere in that range. They do that all across the nation. So that peak then jumped up, and then you saw it fall again, but that's the recession kicking in. And when I get to the end, this is going to be one of the major recap points about what's happening. The demographics are changing. The revenue source is a big issue in town. It probably is something that we ought to keep track of.
Could you back up one page for a
Back up?
second?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any way to get average household size for each of those?
Of all these cities?
Yeah.
Yes, I just need to make a note.
Here.
Here,
Thank you. You got a piece of paper?
I do.
We usually have staff people, and I just look at them and say, write that down. Everybody went home tonight.
Well, I could have done it.
Average household size by all these cities?
Yeah, I mean, Boulder is younger in part because of all the
Absolutely.
college.
College-age students.
Yeah.
Yep, you're right.
This was at the time of the census?
This is 2010 census data. These kind of numbers don't change very fast. They'll, 0.1, 0.2. They're not going to change fast. Behind the revenue outlook, there is a map, and that we spent the hour driving around down there. The green are vacant parcels that are left in town. This will be the third major point that I'm going to make, and that is we are about built out. If you take out this big green one, which is Inzer, this big green one, so this is 111 acres, this big green one, which is Marathon, which is 77, and then those two moderate-sized parcels, the 17-acre parcel there at Platte Canyon and Mineral, and then the two 18-acre parcels down there at Flying Bee. Eliminate those. That little sprinkling of sites, that's what's left to build in Littleton. Yes?
Chris, when we were driving around, we all talked about some of the challenges of some of the greenfield development here because of whatever drainage or whatever the issue might be. And then you talked that there were a few studies done just prior to the recession on redevelopment.
Yes.
Could you summarize what the challenges would be for redevelopment in Littleton as you did those open space developments when we were driving around.
Do you want me to summarize what we said on the tour, or do you want me to?
No,
put the
I'd like to
summary?
hear what you said, because I couldn't hear all that you said about the redevelopment. And I pretty well understood natural topography and
Right.
issues like that on
Yeah.
on some of those others, but I didn't get the summary on the redevelopment.
Usually, the sites that would be a redevelopment potential have a combination of multiple ownerships. Sometimes they have access issues. Sometimes they have, when things get caught up in trusts, and now you can't deal with an individual and get a decision on them. So most of those parcels that we had looked at 3 years ago as potential redevelopment projects, we were bringing people together to talk about, would everybody be willing to throw your land in the deal, and we'll bring a developer in here. Those are very difficult to do because you only have to have one holdout, and then the deal falls apart, or the price goes through the roof. That's what happened with the Lowe's. The last guy in made a lot more money per square foot than everybody else did because he held the key to the whole thing. So they're usually function of sometimes the ownership. An example would be that bowling alley where it's part of a 400-unit package in there and you can't break it out of the package. So the bowling alley would have to be rebuilt into any redevelopment. You just get into all those technical it's not just we need to try harder. You got to get those technical problems solved. Get that signal moved down to the center, but that means then messing with the state traffic code. You know, they're difficult issues.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, behind that then is just some things about our program, which is the Economic Gardening Program. Obviously, a big believer in this. You may or may not know these things, but I just threw in a couple of these things. So the first one is actually a screen capture. I typed in economic gardening to Google. You will see there are 262,000 websites on the internet that make some reference to economic gardening. If you just flip down through that list, you can see the Kauffman Foundation, which is the largest entrepreneurial foundation in the country. They're in Kansas City, a $2 billion foundation. You can see the Edward Lowe Foundation, the SBA Office of Advocacy, Loveland's Project, which is based on ours. You can see the Florida Economic Gardening Institute. Douglas County on the other side of us runs the program. The FRB is the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, is written up. I printed one page. I could have printed all 262,000 of them. I'm just trying to give you a sense for it. Behind that, I think, which is a little more instructive about how our program is looked at across the nation, these are inquiries that have come in to me over the years about our program. The one that happened last week is Michael Bloomberg, who's mayor of New York City Foundation, called up, and they want an extensive interview about what we're doing. But I highlighted a few of these, U.S. Department of Commerce, the Council of State Legislatures, which actually invited me to Hawaii last summer to make a presentation. Japan Social Innovation Journal, National Public Radio, I've done 2 interviews with them. U.S. Economic Development Administration, the European Innovation Council was invited to Trento, Italy to make a presentation over there. The Mayor's Innovation Council, U.S. Department of Commerce, NASDAQ, believe it or not, is interested in what we're doing. Kiplinger, ABC Australia, was invited twice down there to make presentations. Sudbury, Canada.
What is, I'm seeing Maryland not highlighted. What is Chase County? That's not a county,
I don't know. I'd have to go back and check.
but it's a spelling of Charles County.
Might have been misspelled. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Sometimes
I know my
I get
counties
old. Yeah,
from Maryland.
yeah.
Good job,
Sure
sir.
you do.
Good job.
Charles County. Small Business Research Institute of Japan was here, and I think a lot of council members met with them when they were here. Economic Development America Magazine, National League of Cities, Utilities, Economic Developers, City of Chicago, City of Seattle, City of Fukuoka, Japan, North Down Borough, Northern Ireland, American Chamber of Commerce Executive, Japan Export and Trade Organization, American Competitive Forest, which is the entire Western Hemisphere, got invited to make a presentation down in Atlanta to them. The only point is that Littleton's program is well known across the country, in fact, across the world anymore. Gets lots of coverage. I just included this. I got invited to speak at the International Economic Development Council is the professional organization, 5,000 members. They asked us to speak in St. Louis this summer, but on that second page, which is, I think, an indication of how the world is changing, I just pulled this little sentence out. Entrepreneurship has taken on new importance since the Great Recession. But how can you most effectively nurture businesses with the most growth potential? Economic gardening is a fast-spreading approach to helping companies flourish and capture new market share. And then, obviously, the presentation will be about that. Behind that, this is President Obama declares manufacturing top priority. You can see down there, this is a summary statement by the Kaufman Foundation, existing manufacturing beats business attraction. Then they go on to talk about all of that. Behind that is an article that came out last week in Area Development Online. States examine how they use incentives to attract business. And we are featured. Littleton is a major part of this. I don't have all of it here, but it's about 3 pages long. Littleton is major featured in that magazine. So let me go then to some more facts. These are sort of recruiting facts and issues. One of the things I want to point out is what the Metro Denver recruiting operation looks like. When it was set up about 25 years ago, there was agreement that all of the agencies and cities in the metro area would work together. They worked through Metro Denver Chamber, and if you make a contact, a recruiting contact, it comes in here. There's only one contact point in Denver. This group of people were originally called the Crazy Eight, but it was all the large chambers and big operations that are in Denver. We're in this Tier 2. And then in Tier 3 down here were the smaller cities. So South Metro Chamber sat there at Tier 2. We sat down here in Tier 3 with the idea that everybody works through the system. Another thing, which Jeff had mentioned, is we have a contract with the Chamber. One of those elements in that contract is that they will do recruiting for us. So I'm just building the what is case now. This is existing out there. There's a couple other things to note is that we're all bound by an ethics agreement, and that is we cannot steal businesses from each other's communities. What's more, if somebody moves into this community from another community, I have an ethics responsibility to call them up and tell them, hey, we've been contacted by a business in your town. You may want to go talk to them. The other thing is that somewhere in there, there is a study, it's like 2 pages back, is no one in the metro area does retail recruiting. It's considered a very low-level thing. Usually it's considered by rural communities. There are a lot of economic development agencies across the U.S. That prohibit it. They specifically say they can't do rural recruiting. So go to the next page. I just want to give you some stats about the Metro Denver recruiting successes. This is their own data. This is over a 6-year period from 2006 to 2011, including the year 2006. Down this left-hand side are all the communities that participate in that, then their population numbers. Here's the number of deals that they have done, total number of deals during that 6-year period, total number of jobs during that 6-year period, and then I just averaged it, average deals and average jobs per year. I picked out 2 communities that are roughly our size, Castle Rock at 48,000, Wheat Ridge at 31,000. Castle Rock has done 1 deal in 6 years for 100 jobs. That's an average of 0.2 deals per year, 16 jobs per year. Wheat Ridge has done 1 deal for 10 jobs. That's an average of 0.2 and 2 jobs per year. With the exception of Denver, Aurora, and probably Douglas County maybe, which are doing maybe 1.8 to say 2 deals a year. Everybody else is doing a job doing a deal every 2 to 3 years. The general perception is that recruiting is all this big deal and everybody's drawing all these companies in. This is their own data. This is the data of how well that these various cities do. This is mostly the reason they come in contact with us.
Is part of the definition of recruiting that incentives were offered?
Not necessarily. It's not that incentives are in the deal, but a lot of times they are. Yes.
Obviously, this data is not, doesn't paint a particularly compelling picture, but that doesn't necessarily mean that recruiting doesn't work. It may mean that the Denver EDC is not doing a very good job of recruiting.
It's actually considered one of the best in the nation. If you would compare this data around with other states, The only thing that would be different is in the southern states where they land the big automobile plants. This might look a little bit different. But per community, there's like, what, 1, 2 automobile plants in Alabama. So you got to say, well, one community did really well. You still had the rest of the state. I'm just trying to lay in facts so that you got a basis to make a decision about all this stuff, as about how effective, if you dump resources into this, you're probably going to go for 4 or 5 years and do a deal, and you might average, 2, 4 over the 6 years jobs, that sort of thing.
Chris,
Yes.
why didn't you put Littleton's statistics on this page?
Well, we don't recruit. We haven't recruited in 25 years. Our numbers beat everybody's numbers in here. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that the approach we developed, and the reason all these people from all over the country and all around the world, as well as all up and down the Front Range, the reason they come here is because this is not working very well. This is not something that has a high payoff. And we haven't recruited in 25 years. Our job growth has come from local companies. I'll get to what those numbers are here. So this is a report that I think it was 2 years ago, Council had asked for this, is the recruiting of retail. The question was, so we went out and did a survey in here, so you can see all the cities, and you can see that nobody, with the exception of Lakewood, has one little minor piece in there, recruits retail in the metro area. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of just cautions, if you will. These are, I've got a huge file of these. I picked out a few of these, but these are things that actually have happened in and around the Denver area. For those of you who remember when we were chasing the United Maintenance Facility, Indianapolis won that. So here's the headline that came out: United shops around. Colorado offered a bunch of money. Indianapolis upped the ante and offered them even more money. And if you turn over the next page, in 5 years, they bailed on that. Indianapolis was stuck with that bill, and the number was, what was it? Some big number, $295 million in bonds. So even though they won that deal, 5 years later, they got hung out to dry.
Chris?
Yes.
So IKEA, is that a recruited effort to get
I
IKEA?
don't know. I think they cut a sales tax deal with them. I didn't look at the specifics of it.
The city cut a deal with IKEA, yes. I don't know if that counted as a Metro Denver EDC recruited deal, but it counts as, I'm sure, the city of Centennial did.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I thought I heard Jake Chaps talk about that, how it's a disadvantage for him when the government's sort of pumping money toward them.
But that says no retail recruiting.
In terms of the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation, they focus specifically on primary job recruitment.
Jeff, you might want to take a mic because there's people listening.
I apologize. And Chris, I don't mean to interrupt.
Please have a seat.
The Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation focuses on primary job and corporate types of recruiting. In terms of individual city activities, they don't particularly play a jurisdiction over that effort. So if a city does get involved in that kind of effort, it's its own activity. So that could have happened in the city of Centennial. I don't think Metro Denver EDC is counting it.
And this is a 2-year-old chart that we put together for council 2 years ago. So it was a specific request. It would have been prior to IKEA. Let me point out that on the next one, Boston Chicken was actually recruited into Jefferson County up in that Denver West project. And you always see these big headlines, we're pretty excited about being there, Commissioner Gary Laura said. And if you turn to the next page, which is, 94 to 98, Boston Chicken filed Chapter 11, sought protection from its creditors while tried to reorganize, fired 500 employees last week. If you go to the next one, Enterprise Zone gives Adams County a needed boost in landing. Jerry Baby Products, you may remember Jerry, they did the baby carriers and that sort of stuff. So they got a tax break in the Enterprise Zone. And if you look behind it, the point I'm trying to make is if you just look at a snapshot, it always looks good. If you turn it on and look at a movie and see what happens afterwards, it looks a little bit different. So Jerry Baby, they sold to Even Flow, And then if you turn to the next page, Even Flow moved all of its production from Jerry Baby Products in Thornton to other factories. 400 employees laid off.
Chris, so when I look at all the businesses that are, say, south of Mineral, when we were touring with our bus, a number of those businesses had communications with the city when they made decisions about locating here. Was that not recruiting?
If they come, well, first of all, you can move in without making a communication. See, the only thing we would do is pick up and just go onto the list. Recruiting means that you go out, you go make a call, sometimes you use incentive packages, you are competing against other companies to move in there. All of those, if anybody moved in down there, they moved in and of their own choice, no incentive packages. We didn't have any part of the process. Again, and I'll go through these quickly here, but I just kind of give you a feel. This is the world I live in. This is, economic development's got a lot of shadowy parts to it. Merrill Lynch, this was out, and I think they were in northern Douglas County here. If you go the next page, last week Merrill Lynch shocked the local business leaders announcing plans to shut its center. 1,200 employees have a choice of relocating to New Jersey or Jacksonville, Florida, but that was a long discussion. Douglas County lands First Data headquarters. You go to the next page, First Data headquarters.
So did they go to Jacksonville then?
I can't remember where they ended up. First Data came here from Atlanta, and then they moved back to Atlanta. But that's not the one that takes the cake. Well, actually, let me tell you, City's Corpse Diner Club signed a $15 million lease, and then, what's the dates between these two? 96. By 98, City Diners Corp. announced plans to close the customer service center and transfer 800 jobs back to Florida and Nevada. Behind that, the one that I really like, which is Golden, got the Coleman site. So they moved from Wichita to Coleman out here in the Denver West project. If you look at the next page, Coleman moved back to Wichita. But that's not the end of the story, because Coleman has moved back to Denver, making money every trip. Not every deal is like this, but these are just cautions. These are things that you got to be aware of, that if you turn on the movie, and it's not just a headline, but you see what happens afterwards. These are some of the other things that are out of state. Dell, this is a big one in North Carolina, they got $280 million incentives, and I think they closed that plant down 5 years later, laying off 905
Go back to that
workers.
one. We missed part of the article. Could you see if we could get it?
Yes, what is the part?
It's the McClatchy.
Okay.
But
Can I borrow
sure,
your?
why don't you just take this one, because
Okay.
I can't read it until I get the whole thing.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Sometimes.
Thank
So there's other information. There's projects from Michigan. You see where they didn't come through. There's all kinds of people that follow this stuff. Missouri, where 167 projects authorized from 2005-2010, reporting creating just 38% of the jobs they had projected when applying for the program. The one I really like is Scripps moving from California to Florida. They offered them, on the average, $1.2 million per job. And I was thinking about going down there and say, I'll guarantee you a job for $1.2 million. It doesn't sound hard to me. It is the all-time record for cost per job. And there's somewhere in here, Scripps has also laid off people since they went in there. You can see Ohio sued to get their money back. These are called clawbacks now. If they don't perform, it's like, well, we want our incentive packages together. And there's a whole list of these from Florida and on and on and on. So I won't go through any more of those. I think you got the drift on all of those. The last section of this is, I was asked several specific questions, and Bruce, I think you're the Coachella Valley Green Team article that you had sent. I called them up. I did an interview for them. That interview is here, but essentially it is something that exists in a lot of cities, and that is they pull together teams when they hear people are getting ready to leave the city. A lot of times they are behind the curve. These guys, I think, ended up keeping the company in town. There were several things that were put on the table, money put on the table, free rent from the landlord, investment from the company, exchange for equity, reduced power rates. a reduced warehouse, those sorts of things. But you can read that, and the contact information is in there if you want to talk with them. Bruce, you had also mentioned the Longmont Entrepreneurial Network. I did call them up and did a interview. It was really interesting. We were 2 sentences into it, and you said, yeah, we're modeled after the Economic Gardening Project at Littleton. They are a one-person operation. They don't have a lot of money. They basically serve as an incubator. They've got 5 startup companies up there. They struggle a lot because they had been involved with CTEC, and CTEC went under, if you know who CTEC is in the metropolitan area. The last thing I was asked about the Broadway plan in Inglewood and their retail assessment. Talked with their CD director. I apologize, the whole plan is not in there, but I did send you a link. It's fairly extensive. That's about an 8-year-old plan. The CD director told me that it was shelved because it became very controversial. And the retail assessment was done by BBC, which is an old line economic evaluation company here in Denver, and they went and looked at all the sites within the Inglewood area to see, does redevelopment make sense? And that may something you may want to take a look at. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Sorry.
Chris, in some of this, it seems like part of the key is to have seed somewhat of a primary job business that can be present, whether it's someone that's actually here or someone that happens to move here and develops a business. What do you see as the key for that side of it, recognizing, hey, we're doing a pretty good job of germinating once they're here and helping them work on that front? How do you get that seed to begin with?
It depends. It happens, as you said, it happens in both cases. People start businesses here. People will move a very small business in here. If people have moved into Littleton, it's a very short distance. From a business standpoint, those city limit lines don't mean a whole lot. Being over in Centennial, moving over here is 5 minutes drive for them. There are businesses that do that. Once they get here, they get access to all the services, and I think Bruce and Jerry, I showed the presentation a couple weeks ago of all the services we get. But the key to it is, you just take care of that first box. Make sure those guys are growing. Give them advantages. Those are high-end corporate tools they wouldn't normally have. It's like we're a very sophisticated staff that they wouldn't normally have, and they got it for free. And we're answering big questions for them.
With Nova, for example, that does business now in England, are you helping them with your databases in England? Because you can do worldwide stuff,
Right. We don't do English stuff, but you are right. We do have worldwide databases, and if people are looking at markets in those areas, we can. Nova, we didn't happen to do that. We have done lots of stuff for Nova over the years. They've been a really good example of establishing a relationship. They know what we can do. We know what they are about. And we're just like staff. They call us up, and we go to work on it immediately, put it on the computer, and it's down there. So.
Chris, do you use the comp plan or the Broadway corridor, Littleton Boulevard, or Santa Fe studies at all? Is that a tool for you in any way?
Not per se, other than the regulatory aspect of it. Most of the time, the development is community development. So if it's about building something, that's one department over. If they come in and they say, well, where's vacant land in town? As you saw from that map, there are very few parcels, and they're almost all in that South Park area.
Like on the Broadway corridor study, although it doesn't include Marathon, but it has plans for what was at one time hoped. So have you looked? I mean, it's quite old, but have you looked at that?
The only thing we do is to say it's got to fall within those plans and those regs. Anything that's a hard reg, that we always tell them, you're going to go into this site, here's what the regulations are on that site, whatever's on the books at that time.
So otherwise, you're not trying to steer toward that plan.
No.
So, economic gardening has unproven itself to be a valuable tool, clearly. The
Right.
numbers show it, and the international and national recognition. Do you think that Littleton, do you think there's opportunity for us to do some additional type of economic development? And if so, what would you see that being?
The answer would be yes, and the one I would choose would be redevelopment of those sites that we've looked at. Here's where I think your biggest issue are. So the four biggest things going on is your built-out community, you got a flat revenue, you got changing demographics, fourth one slipped my mind for the moment, I'll think of it. But so if I were worried about it, I would go, where's the revenue going to come from? And the revenue has got to come from retail. You got to make sure this is pumping money into town, but somewhere down there, you got to get more retail online. So you got two choices. You got those two big parcels to get those developed. And you saw all the constraints on that happening. And then you've got probably 6 centers in Littleton that are extremely underperforming from a tax production standpoint. Now, from the owner's standpoint, he's probably perfectly happy. He's drawing rent, and whether it's a retail sales tax payer or not, doesn't really care. But from the city standpoint, they're very low. They're like, maybe, the equivalent of $25 sales per square foot, when Aspen Grove does maybe $400 per square foot. It's that kind of difference. So
What was the numbers again, did you say?
I don't know the exact one, but it's huge. Just like 25 versus 400. I mean, it's mostly because they're not retail. In those centers, there's a lot of services, there's churches, there's schools, as you know, those kind of things that don't produce retail sales tax. From the owner of the center, if they're paying rent, why do they care? From the city standpoint, is like, particularly across this north end, we're not drawing a lot of sales tax out of those centers. Our sales tax comes off of the big boxes, Aspen Grove, and those 4 centers that we looked at on the south end of town.
So like Nordgrens, where it's not the
Downtown.
primary that it used to be, but it still functions as a primary.
Yes, Norgan's a primary industry, right. And it's actually, if you would say per, square foot or something, it's gotten better because all the low-end stuff is not there anymore, and it's only the high-value stuff that's there.
So I appreciate what you're saying about wanting to get more money from certain areas, right? But some of those that have converted more to services, if we didn't have those services somewhere in that area, people might be going out of the city to get the services, and while they're out of the city getting the
Shop, yeah.
services, they'll spend a fortune elsewhere, right?
It's-
So we have to be real careful
Yeah, that's exactly right.
with this.
Yeah. And those services need low-rent places. That's what it takes to survive. If you're a TV repair or something like that, you can't be paying retail prices to do those kinds of services. So they serve an absolute function in there. So you get this sort of Rubik's Cube problem of, okay, we've got a flat revenue source, and we got some centers that converted over to other uses out there, and urban renewal is really controversial, and do we wade into these and try to do shadow development like we've done in the past? That's slow, it's excruciating, it takes a long time, but it's like, where is the revenue going to come from on this retail ladder? You've got to add retail to keep it up. If you don't, then the business you're going to be in is constantly pushing the expenses down, and those expenses have got bumpers on them because we're not controlling energy, and we're not controlling health insurance and things that we just don't have control over. I mean, we can change the rate at which we pay for that stuff, but the expenses are always going to try to do this, and if our revenues are running flat, and we've burnt through almost all of our reserves over those 4 or 5 years.
So even though this is not in Littleton, the rebuilding of the King Soopers across the river.
The Inglewood at Bellevue.
Yeah.
Yes.
So potentially, when people go there to get their groceries, or maybe before, on their way to get their groceries, they may go to some other places that are in Littleton because that place has not been really a draw. I mean, that King Soopers was not a draw.
It's possible. I think the biggest thing that's worked for us is the building of the Riverside Downs project just across the river, because if you stop and think about it, if you lived up in that northwest quadrant, your choice of shopping is pretty low end, and that Inglewood King Supers is number 3. That's where Lloyd King used to go. That's the only reason it's probably still there and hadn't been rebuilt. But once we built that shopping center that Steve Kurtz and Jonathan Bush built, they did it. They risked the money and they built it. Now, for the first time, you've got a pretty decent shopping center. It's got some pretty decent stores in there and got some nice restaurants in there. Restaurants generate pretty good sales tax, and they also employ people. They're not high-income jobs, but they're big employers. To me, it's like a game that's got lots of parts to it, and you make one move, and it's like, oh, gosh, something else goes down.
Chris helped me get my hands around this. It seems like that we, in lots of respects, are competing against ourselves. The economic gardening program has done a great job of what you're doing for Littleton, but you're going out there and teaching all of our competitors, so to speak, how to create their own jobs, whereas if they weren't doing that, they may be coming to Littleton because of the services you're able to provide to them. So aren't we kind of competing against ourselves when you go out and start training these other cities?
I highly doubt it. I highly doubt that I'm headed off to make a speech in St. Louis. I don't think anybody from St. Louis is coming here. I mean, there's an outside possibility that's true. It's hard to change that zero-sum game, you win, I lose kind of thing, because that's what recruiting is about. You're either going to get the company or they're going to move here and I'm going to get the company, but one of us is going to win, one of us is going to lose. But if you stop and said what gardening is about, and we were neighbors, if you grow a nice garden, what do I care? You know, you don't care about my garden and I don't care about your garden because we're both creating jobs by growing them locally.
But that neighbor's garden may want to move into your area because of the types of fertilizer you're able to provide that they can't get in their own place.
I'll just tell you as a practical matter, I just have never seen that as an issue for us. Our numbers are really strong, and they're strong against all the metro cities.
But they could.
It could. On paper, it possibly could. I just don't think it's a real practical problem.
I guess I would start with at least a partial contention that what it takes to have primary jobs, Littleton isn't big enough by itself. Our city boundaries are not sufficient to necessarily encourage big levels of primary jobs.
If you're talking about the building being big,
Right.
The answer is yes.
Right.
If you're talking, because what the role Littleton has always played has been small tech companies, engineering companies, back office kinds of operation. We've never been able to compete with the tech centers because, first of all, the center of the world's over there, and secondly, we don't have those size parcels.
I mean, we have some very, very attractive pieces for the residential side of that, and that's why we've been a bedroom community for Lockheed Martin, and some of that history has come along, and we have the great K through 12 education system and some developing opportunities in transportation. So, I mean, those are things that are positive in that side, right?
Yeah, that's all true. Here's another fact, though. 25 years ago, we had more labor force than we had jobs in town. So part of the labor force was going somewhere else to go to job. Today, we have more jobs than we have labor force, meaning that people are driving into town to get jobs here. We're one of the very few communities that have done that.
Now, there's some of us have had a chance to hear them at CML, which is the group Burton. And one of the things they do is they take a look at
I'm familiar with them.
what, I know you are, but I'm trying to,
The rest.
for the rest of everyone,
I'm sorry.
is put a little piece out there, which is they help to determine what types of retail would actually fit for a community.
Yeah, we can do that. We've got the exact same tools they do.
Well, and recognizing, as you sit there and you say, hey, we have 6 centers that are underperforming, recognizing that, hey, that space may be more attractive for a different retailer, what would keep us away from making some cases, looking to build the sales tax revenue side of it, of making the cases to some of those folks, not necessarily overly recruiting, but saying, hey, there's a lot of reasons that this would be a great place for you to have a retail outlet.
We do exactly that, and So you got two kinds of classes. Today, we sent off a package of information to one of the centers on the south end, making exactly that case. But part of it is the center is so old and has, the deferred maintenance on it is the kinds of tenants that are going to make a difference aren't going to look at that kind of environment. You've got to physically change that center. It's got to be a new center. When you've got a center that's built in the 60s, maybe early 70s, that's a 40-year-old center.
But I would imagine that there's some, either it's a business case that can say it makes a lot of sense to do that over time, or not.
And that being redevelop it or locate there?
Redevelopment of a site to say, hey, here's what you can do, and then you have the ability to bring in a retailer that might be paying a little bit more.
Some of the issues are who owns the centers. I'm not going to name centers of people, but there are some people that's the way they operate centers. They live on deferred maintenance.
It's about 5 minutes.
Okay. I just wanted to say I think it would be a benefit, and you can correct me on this, Chris, the business retention and expansion effort that's going on at the Chamber is a real quick thing. I know I've mentioned it a little bit, but I didn't know if folks would want to ask Jeff some questions around that, because it's bringing in some additional research as to why businesses are here and what they may or may not be looking for, and you can speak to it maybe a little more eloquently, Jeff, than I can.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil, and please ask questions, too, along the way. The Chamber itself is conducting a massive business retention and expansion effort throughout the South Metro region. Obviously, we're very focused on the city of Littleton itself and the 80120 zip code because of the relationship the Chamber has with Littleton, but also because of the economic implications that the city has. Whether or not you've discussed it today, the kinds of primary jobs that exist here are significant, from large to like CenturyLink, EchoStar, or even Norgren, to what many of the small types of primary employers are in the South Park or along the Platte River corridor area that really matter to our larger economy. Chris also mentioned that there's an import of employees of the community, and that's true because of that kind of mix of employment, and it's really important for us to know what those primary employers are doing in a variety of ways. Most importantly, if they're planning to expand in the near future, if they're planning to leave in the near future, or if they're doing just great, thank you very much, but we appreciate your recognition of us doing business here. So the intentions of the Business Retention and Expansion Program are to thank and engage our employers for the work they do here, but also look for opportunities for growth. So instead of having a recruiting strategy, when you learn from an existing business that they may be expanding and spending some of their own existing wealth right here, it really can turn from retention to expansion in what we might consider recruitment in some ways. But I'll even turn the conversation a bit, Phil. Beyond recruitment in general, recruitment on a pure economic development stance may come from a community that owns its own industrial park, or a community that has or an agency like the Tennessee Valley Authority, which owns lots of land. They need to recruit business to support its tax base. For a community that has a built-out environment, or that, like Colorado, very rarely owns its own property, a better economic development strategy around recruiting isn't, in fact, direct recruiting, but being very prepared to deal with opportunities that come your way. And when I say that, the city of Littleton has a very well-known name. In Colorado and even outside Colorado, people will think, site selectors will think of the city of Littleton when they think of where should I potentially locate my plant in Colorado. If we collectively aren't prepared, and I'm not saying you aren't, we are prepared, but if we collectively aren't prepared when a company might want to potentially build on the Marathon site or take an existing building if there's square footage available, and don't respond to their RFP or RFI, or just ignore the fact that they might be looking, they'll go somewhere else because they need to spend money somewhere. So being prepared for expansions is actually probably the most important strategy outside of the economic gardening that you're focusing on. And it's tied directly with business retention and expansion itself, and is what the Chamber is working on in our contract relative to the economic gardening program in the city of Littleton. So we serve as your partner in those efforts and want to be collective in the discussion around strategy on getting that done. So I'll take any questions if you have any, but thank you for letting us be a partner, and we'll be reporting to you what we learn in our interview process on business retention and expansion. You're all invited to be a part of it when we're on an interview with a company in the primary or major employer category. In fact, Phil's been on a couple with us already. We'll bring certain staff on various as well, and please let us know if you have questions.
Okay, well, I think at this point, we're going to need to wrap up. We've got another group in. So there's obviously, we need to have some discussion on this. We don't have time this evening, so I would suggest that we kind of keep our thoughts jotting down, and then we can put it on for the study session April 10th, half hour or 45 minutes or something like that, because council or staff, in the event that we want to give them some direction or redirection, we can do that then.
Good idea.
Okay. So, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you for all your work and the tour. That was really fun. So does anybody want to take a 5-minute break or?
I would like to take the break.
Okay. We'll be back here at 5 after.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, you guys are standing up. One thing I want to point out, Chris did not talk about this, but that's a lot of what Glenn and I have talked to you about. We want to make sure that housing stock, we retain this in an active environment that participates in this. It's a service.
Well, that's where the demographic.
Yes, that's where our third average highest.
Yes.
get started. Where does city manager go? Okay. Glenn, I'm going to have you lead this, but what I'd like to do first is have the HP board just run down and have everybody introduce themselves. If you don't mind, we'd start over here.
Oh, Pam Grove?
Chuck Reed,
You can pull that mic closer.
Kevin Kearney,
Near the chair.
Chair.
I'm Margie Clute.
Paul Kastner. Dan Murphy.
Okay. And Bill Hopping is,
On a beach in Newtown.
okay. All right.
Help remind me of that.
What a guy.
Yes.
All right, Glenn, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council and Commissioners. I just want to run through a few things that we provided in your various packets. One is a staff report that we put together that lists where I think the HPB staff and the Council are in agreement on various issues with the Historic Preservation Code, the remaining issues, and then issues to be considered in the future. We've also provided a larger map. Now it's behind me.
It can move.
That shows the opt-in area and the properties within the Main Street District that have opted in. And then also we identify the area that came up in the last discussion with Council about adding this block on the east side of the district. Through a recommendation from Historic Preservation, we provide some sales tax numbers. And then from Council, we had a request for incentive numbers, so we put that together. And then you also have a staff report that lays out the position of the Historic Preservation Board. And with that, I'll turn it over to immediate past Chairman Kevin Koenig of the Historic Preservation.
I get about another week and a half or so.
Okay, I'll take it back.
He's not passed yet.
I'm so
A lame duck.
lame duck. So feel free to have fun. As Chuck said, this is kind of sitting like at the big table at Thanksgiving now. This is neat. And in fact, I hope in the future we can, as boards and commissions, talk to council just one-on-one, get to know each other better, which I think is great. We've spent pretty much the last half of 2011 trying to go through how the code's been and what's worked and what hasn't worked and where we can tweak that and make that work better. So just quick background, the code was originally put together as a sort of, I won't say loose, but parts and pieces of codes from all over the country, and parts and pieces worked pretty well, and most of it worked pretty well, and I think we got a lot done using the code as it was. And in going through this process and things and discussing the areas of concern and then actually looking at Glenn's memo where we're in agreement and where we may still have some things to discuss, we're actually, I think, pretty close all in all the way around. I think the main point that, and the big thing I think that we really just need to come to terms with is really what is historic preservation. Is it, some form of oppressive government, crackdown on property owners, or is it really simply an extension of zoning? And we submit that it is really more of an extension of zoning, and like when a zone district is created, it's created by the Planning Commission and the city, and rules and regulations and stipulations are put into place that limit what one can and cannot do with their property. Historic preservation, we feel, is just an extension of that, and actually even in a softer way, because all we're really doing is looking at keeping the cultural heritage of an area relevant. And in Littleton, I think we're really lucky compared to some other cities where we have a really distinctive downtown that we really identify with. And that's where we celebrate Western Welcome Week. That's when we talk about Littleton. We're not Centennial, we're Littleton. We have a downtown, and this is where we started, and this is where our roots are. And that's really where the discussion of Main Street and historic preservation sort of stemmed from really 10 years ago when I started on the board in 2002. And we've grown from there, and we've come a long way. We started with an original district of some 84 buildings, quite contentious. We had great public meetings. When we pulled that back, they were exciting and thrilling, and I know all of us and some of us in this room really enjoyed the passion that was shared amongst all of us. But we came in with what is now an opt-in district, which says that property owners who want to participate along a designated corridor, in this case Main Street, could say, we want to be part of preservation, and in that, we get incentives. And part of those incentives and those discussions were not only to honor historic preservation, but to create an economic engine that would promote growth and economic development within downtown and specifically along Main Street. I think the biggest point of, or at least what I perceive as the divergence is, is there a tipping point where enough people are interested in historic preservation within the opt-in district that says that everyone else should participate? And unlike zoning, where you get your zoning and that's what you get, we're saying we'd like to see if 66% of the people within that area want to participate in historic preservation, that's a supermajority, and then everyone should. And I've heard the argument that historic preservation takes away from property rights. Well, I would submit that historically designated buildings and people who have chosen to participate in historic preservations, when they reach that supermajority of 66% or greater, their property rights are also in jeopardy of those who are not participating. So what we're trying to do with the code is look for a way to evenly distribute the way buildings are looked at and thought about within the city, so that a developer coming in, a board reviewing, a council making a decision on a historic district or historic property has a level and even playing field with a set of guidelines that's well understood. And the great thing that's happened in my tenure on the board is we did downtown design guidelines, and then we did historic building design guidelines or standards. And so we have the tools in place to take buildings within a historic district, both contributing and non-contributing. We have the tools to look at both of those in a concise way that's easy to understand. So non-contributing buildings would follow the downtown design guidelines. Contributing buildings would follow the historic design standards. And with that, then we have the tools. We have an easy way to recognize that. We have a way to, I think, create a uniform district with fair and equally distributed ways of looking at historic preservation. I think that's the biggest issue from what I understand. There was some discussion on the list of merit and whether we should have a 30-day hold for demolition or not. It was not a unanimous vote by the board, but we felt, and in my opinion, that by deleting the 30-day hold on demolition, we used the list of merit as an advocacy program and an educational tool to say, we've looked around the city, we've seen you have a structure that we feel contributes to the historic and cultural heritage of Littleton, and we want to recognize that and have you understand that without penalizing you and then going back through all the procedures that would be required to tie a 30-day hold on demolition to the property through legal things. And so we thought that was an easy way to just use that as an advocacy program. The designation of individual landmarks, I think we were all pretty much in agreement that, if the individual owner wants to come in, great, that's their choice. If it is a building that, and the one that's often cited is the Little House, if somebody wanted to take that or destroy it or change it so significantly, not that it already hasn't been, but change it so significantly that we wouldn't even recognize it as the Little House, is that worthy of designation without the owner's consent? We liked the recommendations, that were put forth with 200 citizens of Littleton, a majority of council, really make it arduous and not where it was just at the whim of the board or the council or somebody to say that. So I think in these discussions that have happened over the last 6 to 8 months have been really productive, and I think we've gotten really close, and I know we as a board would really welcome any kind of discussion about any of those issues or any other concerns with respect to historic preservation and what we do.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, I think let's just take them in order. We have down first the Main Street District, which I think we all agree has been successful as an opt-in district. What's proposed to council is that when we reach that tipping point, as Kevin mentioned, of 66% of the folks within the opt-in area have agreed to opt in, then the remainder of the district should become whole. We've estimated the number of properties. We think we're at about 60%. Latest tally here, 58%. Thank you. Of the properties currently have opted in. I know we're working with at least 2 to 3 other properties as well. So we're approaching that point now. So I'll leave it open.
But I guess if the 66% isn't palatable at the end of this discussion, we would just like to leave it as is instead of making it even more arduous. Would be the board's fallback position.
Councilor Nemser.
Well, I may make your task even harder because I'd like to see the Main Street Historic District be expanded and go all the way from Powers Avenue clear down to Littles Creek. That will take in all the 5,600 and 5,700 blocks of all of that. So it would allow a private residence to opt into the district and receive the tax-type benefits that are available to the properties along Main Street. Businesses along Alamo and a lot of those older houses there have been converted to businesses, and they would be eligible to join as well. But by taking the 5,600 and 5,700 blocks of all of those streets would expand the boundaries and I think make your task a little more difficult to get 100%.
From a personal point of view, I would welcome that, to have a harder task. However, and we talked about that, and one of the things that came up in that discussion was we didn't want to come out right away and say we want to bring those 2 areas in without some thorough discussions like we had with the Main Street folks, at least up front, to say, here's what we're thinking about, can we get your input? And then hopefully out of that, and I think specifically with the residential piece, what kind of incentives can we offer them to help encourage and develop that area? Because that's a question I don't know the answer to.
And maybe you look at some of the incentives you're doing for the Loudon Street.
Exactly.
For residential.
Mm-hmm. We don't have any for Loudon Street. We just made it a district, but there are no real incentives there other than the ones that come with just historic preservation in general, with the tax credits.
Councilmember Taylor, if I can add on to that, a little bit of our discussion also included, again, a general support for that goal, and we'd like to put that into our parking lot and separate that out from the specific issues that are in front of the council at this time and bring that back, again, in a measured policy discussion over the next year or so, really begin to take a look at that because it's a very exciting option.
But I think if you looked at that seriously as a possibility, then that's going to change the discussion we've got about the Main Street District.
And I'd like actually to have that boundary go to the north side of Church. I believe there are at least a couple properties south of Littles Creek that might be of interest. I walked down there to and from yesterday to a ribbon cutting and tried to see what else was down there. And so I'd like to see that. And I would hope if you want to put it in the parking lot, for people listening, it means you want to put it aside for discussion later, that you would not take a whole long time to do that, because we know that sometimes things suddenly get changed before we have a chance to talk to people.
Well, I think it's exciting from the Historic Preservation Board side that we're even talking about expanding preservation, because that's not been the case in the past. So to hear, wanting to expand preservation and spread the success of what we feel the Main Street's done to other areas, I think is a great idea. But, or at least we were looking for some direction or clarity, at least on the proposal or the discussion as a way to clarify the code at this time so that people understood the direction that we were going.
So, Jim,
Well, I think Chuck's idea of putting it in a parking lot for the time being is certainly not a decision we should be making tonight, because it does require, I believe, having contacts made with all those property owners in that area, whatever the boundaries is, whether it's 56, 57, or clear through 58, but having a meeting to talk about what the benefits would be. Still leaving it as an opt-in option. People can opt into the district or not, but here are the benefits if you decide to do so. And I think that discussion needs to occur before any action is taken. I think what we need, though, is whatever it takes in order to look at whether we're going to expand the boundaries off of Main Street, which it already wraps around Rappin onto the corner of Alamo anyway, but whether we're going to expand those boundaries off of Main Street to include other parts for that district. However, we need to set that up.
well, we can review this, I mean, we kind of agreed to this expansion, correct?
Yeah, I thought we did.
Right. Okay. So to have HP take a look at this additional expansion, and then I think there needs to be some pretty good study done on that, because we need to get an inventory of that area and some analysis, and definitely some conversations in the community there. Council, where are you at the 66%? Because, Jim, I would think that regardless of what they come back with, we still need to have some level of percentage.
Well, I would think that any additional people coming in an expanded area or future area would want to know what the ground rules were, at least at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's an issue regardless.
Bruce?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bruce?
For the sake of the discussion, I think that what we have is a tremendous success here with what we have, and I know it's the fallback position to stay with what we have and not move towards your recommendation, but I think that kind of stability might help the further discussion about expanding the district, and those people who might be hesitant about it or have issues about it, staying with what's been successful would be helpful to us ultimately if that was our goal to expand. I would think we stay with what we have because it works. And that would be, for the sake of discussion, what I would suggest.
Okay. Any other discussion on that?
Well, I thought when we discussed this several weeks ago that most of us, majority of us, wanted to do away with the mandate that after 66% everybody would have to come in. In my head, the very fact that we have as many as we do now says to me that there are benefits that people have recognized, and they come into the district, they opted in because they saw those benefits. So I personally do not support the mandate that then everybody else has to come in. If we did away with that mandate, there wouldn't be an issue of drawing boundaries that let people identify themselves as properties. I mean, we'd still do that, or, I mean, they'd ask to identify themselves as properties. And hopefully we would have incentives, just as we still do, that would encourage even maybe more incentives, and I do have a few to suggest later, that would attract even more people in. So maybe I'm the only one that still thinks we don't want to, that I don't want to have the mandate for 33%.
Do you want to keep it as it is?
I want to change that 66. I want to drop the mandate that after 66% of whoever's in whatever boundaries we have to then also
But that's not in the code now.
It's not in.
It's not in the code, right?
The proposal.
It's actually a
It's a proposal to
simple
put it in the
Well, yeah,
code.
so I don't.
So you want to keep it as it is?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
sorry, I've got my
Okay.
brain wrapped around
That's okay.
something or other.
If there's no more discussion, Jerry?
I would prefer to remain as is. And the reason is, it's something that a lot of people worked hard to come to that agreement on, and I think it is working at this point. I don't want to change it because I like the way it's working. It's not broken. I would prefer to leave it as is.
Jim?
I'd just like to say that whatever other types of benefits you can come up with that would get a property owner to want to be part of the district, I think I certainly would welcome that. Having greater benefits being in as opposed to being out would incentivize people to join.
Bill?
I listened to 2 hours and 5 minutes of the 2 hours and 25 minutes discussion that occurred on the 24th, and I understand property rights and the potential of seeing the criteria be more than they are. But when I watched that, I said, of all the material that I read, I'm not sure folks have an even understanding of what the requirements are if you opt into the district or you are part of the district. I'm not sure that threshold is too high. It's kind of like a dress code at the office. You know, there's still a lot that can happen inside that. Folks can be told, hey, you need to wear a tie. But you can wear a bow tie, you can wear a tie, you can wear a regular tie, bow tie, bolo tie. And there's a lot of options that occur inside of that. And then when I look at the benefit side of it, I'm not sure I want to give away that much in the way of benefits, but I would wonder why someone wouldn't want to be in the district. And I'm not sure, and I'll just say, I turn to the rest of the group. Do you really understand what the criteria is and how difficult or not it is to meet that criteria? Because this is essentially pretty much a facade requirement. It's not talking about what you're doing inside your property. It's not talking about whether you have a low flush toilet or not, or that indeed you have to have wood floors inside your building or anything like that. There's a lot of places where you can be doing a lot of things, but what it does is it says, hey, from a facade perspective, you want to kind of be looking like your neighborhood. And Kevin's point, stated more eloquently than I could, it's kind of like, we have some requirements, at least with regard to our front yards, that we maintain weeds and we cut our lawn, and that things kind of look okay, because I don't particularly like to cut lawns, but I do it because, it's the look of the neighborhood, and it keeps the values of everyone's property at a different level. And I don't know whether 66% is the right number or not, but I think, at least if I was coming down on this, I'm not sure we've had a good discussion as to, does everyone around the table, as we're looking at this, really understand what the requirements are to be in the district, and understand, is that difficult to be in a position where, hey, you go down Main Street in Littleton and everything kind of has a good feel to it, and it has an ambiance that's there, and whatever their business they're doing behind is subject to other codes that are present in the city, but it kind of gives you that sense that you walk down a neighborhood street and folks have their lawns cut and kind of weeds taken care of, and I'm not sure that's a bad thing yet. So I kind of turn it back to the table and say, hey, I've read through everything, but I don't think we've talked about how difficult it is to actually comply or not. And that's my thoughts.
I think we tried to demonstrate that within the photographs of the 5 buildings that we chose. The Hancock building, for example, which was Vito's, really had a front that covered up the historic asset when they came in and asked for a grant to help renovate that facade. We were fortunate to find that all the original brick and fenestration was there, and we brought that, and we didn't, but the owner brought that building back to be more like it was back in the day. And that was just lucky because it was all still there. The Old Town Tavern, I think, is a great example. It was originally a theater, and it was sort of a background building and had been infilled. The owner came to us and said, we want to do something to spruce it up. Well, we didn't make him go back and have it look like the old theater with the Mayan details and such on it. He says, I want to do something like this, and it recalls what that's about. And he was able to do that and do a more modern expression. It wasn't we restricted him or kept him from doing what he wanted. The old vacuum shop, Cal Merib's shop, basically was just to clean up and do some new windows and add a garage door that said this was a gas station. So again, not a heavy hand. I think the other example with the Ned Kelly's Irish Pub or the Friends and Grocery, again, a background building. The Oasis, as classy a place as that was, was sort of hidden. And Ned Kelly's came in and said, we want to make this an Irish pub and doll it up. And here you see, and I don't think you see a heavy hand of historic preservation saying, this was once a stable, put those barns back in. Let's make this a thriving and successful business. And then I think the Crawford Salon, before and after that became the candy shop, really was just a paint and put some awnings on there. So I don't think you see historic preservation coming in and taking a heavy hand, but really trying to facilitate what those businesses want to do, and not pushing as it's been sometimes touted that it's a heavy historic agenda. Where really our goal has been to promote downtown, promote the historic feel and look, without really being heavy-handed. And really the only reason we were looking at the 66%, and that just really comes out of, looking at the Senate, to stop a filibuster, you got to have supermajority of 66%. So that's where that came from. We thought that seemed like a reasonable amount so that people who had opted in, the district knew that when they got to a tipping point, or if a new district, say, another housing development somewhere, or Alamo Street came together before this board and said, we want to have our own historic district like Main Street. If 66% of the owners wanted to participate in that, then everyone would do that so that we would have an even, look. And I think one of the things I thought about was, if they don't want to be in the district, can they choose to be a non-contributing building but still part of the district, which would then fall under the guidelines of the downtown design review guidelines as opposed to the historic review design guidelines. Regardless, a building that's within the TIS is going to get reviewed one way or the other by some board or city staff. We thought that, at least within the historic district, that you had a knowledge base of people who sit on this board. We go through quite a bit of training. We all go through a thing called boot camp, which is an all-day session, which is just fantastic and teaches you how to be a historic board member and how to review historic buildings. So what we were really trying to do is just create a level playing field, an even way where somebody knew they were doing one-stop shopping and simplifying the whole process. So that was the logic behind the whole thing, is just to make everybody have just an even playing field, and so that if I have a historic building in a historic area, that I know the guy next to me, whether he chooses to participate or not, still has to follow some kind of guidelines similar to me. And if he chooses not to do anything to that building, there's nobody on this board or in this room that I'm aware of that's going to make him do anything.
Glenn, do you want to address Phil's issue?
Yeah, and actually,
then Bruce.
I think Kevin hit it. I think what's really successful is they do have the tools and they are trained. They have 2 sets of design guidelines, and they're guidelines for a reason, because you just can't have a standard coded answer to every particular building, and they use their expertise to find the best solution for something that's proposed. And then again, they also have a good idea of the context of where the building's going in and can make it fit. So it's hard to say exactly what the answer is in every particular case, but you rely on a well-trained board in this case.
The point that was coming out, and Kevin has said it, but I'll try and say it a little more bluntly. Just by being in downtown Littleton, a property owner is subject to the downtown design guidelines. If they're a contributing member or contributing property for the historic district, now you have the historic guidelines that have to be met. A property owner can be a non-contributing member of the district, as I understand it, and so that's the part. They can be a non-contributing member of the district. They are subject to no more requirements than they're already going to be subject to because of the downtown design requirements, but they can be part of the district and participate in the benefits. And I can't see, I can't see any reason why someone wouldn't participate at that level because they're not doing anything more, at least as I understand it. And if I'm wrong, somebody please correct me on that.
First Bruce and then Bruce.
Well, I'm going to, I think, compliment the board for doing a lot of hard work over a long period of time, property by property, to get to this point. The state's, certainly back to the inception of this whole thing, as you said, Kevin, a lot of folks were in on the, thrashing out the details. But
Thoughtful and spirited discussion.
indeed. But therein, there's the tail of the tape. I mean, I think what was forged in that process has come to fruition. I'm very sympathetic to what you're trying to do with the 66%. I think ultimately it's reflective of a combination of what goes on elsewhere in other communities broadly, as well as equitable treatment for a variety of reasons. Yet in our city, in this place, in this time, what Bruce and Jerry said is pretty much true too. I mean, what we've got works very well, and I think under the circumstances, it's probably it probably is, and this has come up in other venues as well. But if it ain't broke overtly, probably don't try to fix it. Yet it doesn't take away from the stuff like True Grit and all of the outreach and the work you guys have all done with individual property owners to say, hey, you've got an issue, you need, you're in the district, you want to do a few things, let's sit down and figure out how to make it happen and do it in a cost-effective way that meets the intent, and not to basically say we have, it's our way or the highway. So it's been very collaborative, I guess, is the thing, and I really respect that from the board.
Bruce.
Phil, just one point to emphasize what I'm saying about leave it alone. I know in the previous meeting we had a discussion about not being sure what non-contributing meant. It was not clear in the ordinance. So it's those kinds of, maybe built-in lack of clarity that I don't want to see what we have that works very well become a discussion item when so much other work went into this 10 years ago over issues like what non-contributing means. We're not sure what it is, but it seems to be working in the ordinance. Maybe we can change it a little bit. But that kind of maneuvering around of the ordinance, I think, opens up an opportunity for a lot more misunderstanding. If we have some misunderstanding of it now, it would be worse than, I don't really see, I don't need to stick my hand in that beehive to know there's bees in there. We just don't need to go that far. I think what we have works really, really well, and that's, again, that non-contributing is an example of that.
I think at this point we have a majority who believe that keeping it as is preferred. And so there you go. The other thing then is that I think that we all would support you guys working on expanding the district and bringing back recommendations as to how far and what gets included, and you may have to stick your hand in that beehive a little bit to kind of see how that, yeah, look at that smile. Peggy?
Yeah, I would suggest, at least for them to look at, and they can bring back to us, maybe some additional incentives. And I think I'm understanding what I read in a couple of other cities. Steamboat Springs and Manitou, I think, have some incentives that wouldn't be very expensive, but might be useful. And I did bring these, but you guys can look them up yourself and see if there's something there. Then I wish we had more money to help fund grants. And this is probably a topic for another session. I'm just wondering, nobody leap over the table at me, please. I'm just wondering if a district tax or a city, teensy-weensy city tax or whatever might generate additional money to help fund grants. But because the more buildings we get, the more demand there or desire there is for grants. So anyway, so that's a larger discussion.
Based on the document with the future considerations, incentives are on there, so that's something you guys have even asked that you want to do some
Well,
review.
and that is something we want to explore, and that especially came up in the discussion with, specifically on Alamo Street coming in, or looking at Alamo Street and having those discussions with those owners to see if we could flesh out anything in that discussion, because I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Then there's also a comment that council stated support for streamlining the process for property owners who wish to join. So that might be...
Might I make a suggestion based on the discussion I've heard here today? If we keep it the same, there's a potential of 2 or 3 reviewing authorities, which would be Planning Commission, the Design Review Committee with the city, and or Historic Preservation Board. If we could consolidate that into one entity, and that may still be the Design Review Board, but it takes a couple members from Planning Commission, a couple members from Historic Preservation, so we have a consensus board where it's a single point of contact. That might actually help, because I did a project in downtown Littleton where we went through the Design Review Board, and then we went through Historic Preservation, and the process lingered for months instead of weeks. And I think if we could get a single point, in my perfect world, and it's mostly my ego, and it doesn't even matter anymore because I'm leaving, but
That's the third time you've mentioned that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll still be around. I just live up the street. Anyways, that would all come through preservation on any building that was within kind of the football, if you will.
Yep, that's something actually, Mayor, that staff's looking really hard at. In fact, just recently, I've had a conversation with Kirsten about a property who's in the Main Street District. They're not making any improvements at this time, but they want to join the district. And is it possible to just bring that forward to council directly? And then when they come back for physical improvements, then they're back before HPB. So you may see one of those, and I think Kirsten's comfortable with that under our present rules. So I think we'll be able to fast track some.
About that too. If we can get a building into the district or want to participate in historic preservation, and because I don't know anybody on the board who would say, no, we don't want that. So if it goes straight to council and that becomes, they want to do this and participate so that they can take advantage of the incentives, which is the specific reason for this project that is being referred to, we think that's a great idea.
Okay, that's great.
Can I ask them a question, too?
Yeah.
So, have you guys considered ACC? In terms of buildings, the elementary school building is certainly old enough, and the main building, Sternberg Building, which everybody loves, American brutal or whatever that style is. Brutalism. Is, I think, 40 years old this year. If not this year, then next year. And I don't know how we would work with state stuff, but I just hope maybe you might talk to them.
I know some people over there, so I could.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you do, but I mean, I just...
If you weren't going.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
As a citizen advocate.
Okay, well, let's shift gears into a little bit more complicated issue, and that's creating a new historic district, moving away from Main Street, but some other part of the community wants to create their own historic district. Presently, the ordinance states that you can have over a majority of people against creating a district, and the present rules say that it could still potentially happen. And what I think staff and the Planning Commission is reducing that amount so that you would have to have 66% of the folks within a new district actually sign on to create the new district. So that's, I guess, the next progression in historic preservation and creating new districts in Littleton.
And again, we chose the 66% to tie it into our thoughts on the Main Street district, the Main Street area. And I know from helping form the Loughton Street district, where we had everybody but 2 people that were interested, we were, as a neighborhood, very interested in making sure everyone participated so that, again, we were all under the same rules. And I think Loughton Street's been very successful, and we've had additions to 2 of the structures and windows put in and air conditioners and all kinds of things that we were told you couldn't do when you became a historic district, but we've done them quite successfully. And I think our neighborhood has taken a lot of pride in being that district and elevated itself and taken even better care of those houses because of that.
How many houses in total?
18, I believe.
18, so it was 2 out of 18. Okay.
We didn't pull Mountain Bell, which is what we still call the building at the end of the street.
So, in a sense, we're almost Arapahoe Hills? Is that
Arapahoe Hills is
If
potentially
you were to
future.
cite an example for, yes.
Okay. Council?
So help me understand this a little bit, because I did ask Lynn, I think I asked or emailed or something, like with Loughton, it would seem to me that, I've got to remember my orientation here, at least one street west of them would be
Correct.
just as logically, and I knew that street name, but I was just moving
Yeah.
that way, and maybe 2 streets, I think I've got that right, but anyway, could just as easily be part of that, or else another name or whatever. I have in my head that if you have something like that chunk of buildings, the group of buildings, that you could have a boundary that just calls them something, and then they can opt in or not. Now, right now, buildings here and there can be in that area, could be doing something different, and you'd lose some of the character, but you'd still have some. So is there some logic in expanding a boundary there?
When we did the Loughton Street district in 2002, we did it as a single block in a neighborhood and petitioned everyone on the street because that's what we wanted to do. I wouldn't be in favor of expanding, well, I guess we didn't want to work that hard to go down the subsequent blocks, but that was our desire in 2002. If it's deemed that a district needs to be expanded or have multiple streets on it, I propose that you do the same thing that we did on Loughton, and you go door to door and ask everyone what they want to do, and they sign a petition, and like we did, if the majority was there, we wanted it to all be in. So, and that's the way we presented it.
Jerry?
I love hearing from Kevin, because you're on the way out, you know. But I would like to hear from other board members.
I can kind of piggyback. I think The thing on a residential, when you're doing a residential district, I think it's important that if it's going to be a historical district, everybody in that district is in, because you don't want to have, I think Arapahoe Hills, part of their incentive to make it a district was that people were starting to do scrape-offs. So you don't want to cherry pick and not have the entire district in and allow people to scrape their house or not have it a cohesive district. So I think the residential districts, you have to be real careful. I think everybody has got to be in.
Actually, that was one of our fears on
Yeah.
Dalton with light rail coming in.
With that coming in, and you're never going to get 100% of anything, really. So I think there needs to be a certain percentage tipping point, I guess, in a residential district. And I think in Arapahoe Hills, I'm not sure, and maybe Andrea knows more than I do about that, but I think that was the initial concern, is people were starting to do scrape-offs in there, and it's like, ooh, we got to save this neighborhood. So I think it's got to be a majority
And I would just,
residential.
I would just reiterate,
We're not going to get 100%.
reiterate the point as well, that this is, in some respects, simply a zoning designation, and that you wouldn't want to create an opt-in zoning district that allowed someone to have a residential house and then a commercial building and then two residential homes. That's not the type of community that Littleton is and wants to explore, except for, again, perhaps in certain neighborhoods. But generally, that's how we're looking at the designation.
So following up with that, so if somebody on Crocker, for example, individual house, and I think there are some significant ones there, if they wanted to become a landmark,
All
could
they
they?
have to do is ask.
So we could have spotty landmarks.
And we do.
And, no, I know that. So I'm just hearing this. We might have checkerboard of landmarks, but not a district. Okay.
Correct, and we're not asking that if you get a checkerboard of landmarks in a specific area that reaches 66%, that becomes a district. We're not willing to make that leap. That has to be brought forth by the people, the property owners within that area.
Other questions? I had a question. One of the things that I understand, Margie, what you're saying about that, and it does make sense, but it also kind of, I get issues with that too. And, you know, a perfect example of it is to drive through Observatory Park, and, I mean, you just want to cry. Part of that's because nobody was paying attention to the architecture when people were building, but I do wonder if there is not something between doing nothing and doing that. And we looked at, we've got reports from some of these other cities and some of the things that they're doing, petition by citizens, extraordinary significance and ability to not resulting in hardship for the owner. I mean, there seems to me to be some kind of interesting tactics there, because you're really dealing with residential at that point, and you are not dealing with commercial where there's a landlord, and you're not just dealing with facade, you're dealing with the roof and the driveway and even, in some cases, the landscape, particularly in Arapahoe Hills. I mean, that whole mid-century modern, there's a whole landscape that goes with that, too. So have you guys done much in-depth on that, kind of maybe tried to look at some sort of a hybrid recommendation that would bring in more community opportunity or input there? Kind of like when a liquor store wants to pop up, he's got to get the blessing from.
We haven't spent a lot of time talking about that, but certainly that would be an item that, again, we could take back in the parking lot. And it sounds like there's going to be a lot of renewed energy around different alternatives that the Historic Preservation Board could pursue. I believe, Mayor, in the interim, that what you do have is the opportunity to get neighborhoods in Littleton that will look in, to some degree, some of the same land use development patterns that you see in Observatory Park and in other older neighborhoods in Denver will begin to happen here. And at the end of the day, some of that's just fun. Because really, you don't want every single block to be a historic district. That takes away from what the intent of the Historic Preservation Code is. We're not trying to keep everything the same. And it's just a tool to allow pockets that provide that link to who we were in our past. And so it's a great option, and we'd be happy to take a look at that.
I think we have an example where that movement has sort of started, and I think it's Aberdeen Village.
Absolutely.
The signposts reflect Aberdeen Village. There's entryways that reflect Aberdeen Village, and the identity is clearly Aberdeen Village. You know, so there's something there that sort of was in Arapahoe Hills before they made the next step, and there may be some other places that were defined communities, but there is a middle step there, and it's Arapahoe Hills was it and is moving from it, and Aberdeen is it now, and maybe that should be recognized. Maybe the city can make an effort to recognize that somehow in some way, that it makes it a win-win for the neighborhood.
Absolutely, and the Historic Preservation Board was pleased in this last year to provide a pattern workshop for folks in Aberdeen Village to take a look at what some remodeling options might look like. Littleton's housing stock is aging, and this is an issue that's going to face the entire community. And so this is a very timely discussion, and one that really, from a policy standpoint, it's fun to hear council talking about this. That's really showing some leadership and vision, so thank you.
I keep hearing Littleton's housing stock is aging, not nearly as badly as Highlands Ranch housing stock. So it may be getting older, but it's
getting better.
Definitely, yeah. Well, on that issue, then, I guess I would recommend that we defer a decision on that and ask you guys to come back with, maybe vet it out a little bit more and come back with some alternatives, some options, some things that might be fine, you know, and I think we've got a couple of great examples. Aberdeen Village is a great example. Arapahoe Hills, what's going on? Because other ones will crop up at some point, and having some nice roadmap for future people to make decisions based off of, and then having these examples of how it worked would be a great legacy for us all to depart. Is there any other comments on that? Okay, Glenn?
Well, Mayor, the next one is designating an individual historic landmark. Again, the same issue is whether that can be done consensually or non-consensually. It's very similar to creating a landmark district. Perhaps the direction is the same. Maybe the HBB can go back and look at other alternatives of how to bring forward more of a mandate to create an individual landmark. But that's kind of the third issue that's out there is what's the process for creating an individual landmark? Do we absolutely have to have that owner's buy-in to designate an important property to the history of Littleton?
Comments, council? HP, are you okay with that?
Well, yeah, the recommendations that we saw that came forth from the last meeting, we were all in favor of, so we didn't take that any further. If the individual wants it, fine. If they don't, and it's in a large majority of citizens feels that we need to take action on it, and a majority of council sees that action needs to be taken, we would sponsor that.
I think in Kevin's memo, it was more specific.
Yeah,
Phil?
Was what you needed to do a non-consensual designation.
yeah. I think the non-consensual piece that Kevin outlined in his memo says either you have the property owner's consent or you have a fairly high standard, which is looking for 200 signatures, which means, you know, that's
Citizens of Littleton, not historic Denver, coming in here and signing it.
right.
Yeah.
And then a 5-7 vote of the council that would have hearings attached to it, and certainly you have a chance, and the property owner will have a chance to vet themselves
in the effort, and so, it's, I think, knowing that at times some people kind of get caught up in their own world, even though something may be valuable to a broader community. But we do have the potential for some properties, and Kevin mentioned specifically the Little House, and it's...
Or even the Carmelite Monastery, which was J.J. Benedict's home, which isn't currently a historic landmark, but on the list of merit. That's such a significant structure and historic landmark in Littleton, and if a developer gave the Carmelites a generous fund and said, I want to develop that into multifamily housing, well, look at how that impacts the Littleton History Museum, that corner, a true landmark of Littleton. Is that something that we feel comfortable with just saying, oh, fine, let's just do it? And I think that's a pretty high standard on not just making non-consensual designation a tool that could be used by the board or the council or anyone, but it reaches a higher level, that it really does have to be something significant.
Bruce? Oh, Bruce and then Jerry.
If we were to adopt this and we had a case come up where that was done and we completed the supermajority council vote of 5 or more, what's the appeal then for the landowner who disagrees?
I would defer to council.
The appeal would go under what's called a 106 appeal of the record to district court. What that means is it's a pretty difficult standard to overcome to overturn the council's decision.
But there continues to be a due process opportunity for that property owner.
Yes.
Jerry?
I guess I got a little lost here. I thought we were talking about possible, people wanting to opt in. Now we're talking about non-consensual.
It's for the historic landmarks.
Individual.
Right.
Individuals.
I guess every time I look at this, and I like the way things are today, that's for sure, but I can't help but feel like we get a little bit of mission creep. We all agree on something, and then we say, well, let's get a little bit more out of this. I have an uncomfortable feeling with that part.
I certainly recognize that. And I think that Littleton even has in its own history times when the citizens have rallied around specific landmarks, and I'm going to point out specifically to the municipal courthouse, which in the early 1970s was almost demolished and razed by Arapahoe County. And it was an outcry of residents who said, this is really a historically significant structure for us, and stopped the demolition process, went through a legislative process, and that's all we're referring to here, is to create an opportunity for a legislative process. Ultimately, in this case, the courthouse was saved, which has become an anchor and really a truly identifiable location. And again, certainly recognizing the importance of private property rights, there is also the fact that we are members of a society together, and we've adopted rules and standards related to democracy, and this is just playing that out in a manner where people really have the opportunity to not be hurt economically, or at least to be made whole in some way, shape, or form.
And I don't see this as scope creep as much as creating a definition that one can understand. Because right now it's sort of arbitrary on consensual, non-consensual designations. So,
well, I think, Jerry, in the simplest terms I can put it in my head, is that one size doesn't fit all with this. And so when you're looking at a historic shopping district, essentially, then looking at a historic neighborhood, then this is different. This is a landmark. Bruce, did you have?
Well, yeah, I guess, it's already in the code. So essentially, we're not doing anything that's not already part of the code. But
actually, it puts a higher standard.
We're actually raising the
standard. I mean, this actually increases the standard in which
makes it harder. Execution of it, because there was never clear in the code as to how it would actually get done. You're right.
Correct.
But it's pretty narrow in the application in terms of reading this. Property direct overwhelming. Property or district has overwhelming historic importance to the entire community. Overwhelming significance shall, for purposes of the section, mean the property or the district. possesses unusual or uncommon significance, so forth and so on. I think this is 4-6-9. At the end of the day, I don't know that we've ever used this.
Not since I've been on the board.
Okay, but it strikes me as not having the tool if you need the tool, and as you're indicating, you're putting a higher standard into it, and it is a legislative with recourse. It seems to me to be something that makes a lot of sense to have for purposes of, the situation like the Carmelite Monastery, where you really, it's a core property. I mean, you're not going to do it for virtually any, maybe a handful of properties in the entire community, but if something were to happen in one of those communities, Presbyterian church or something, somebody wanted to sell that and do it. I mean, it's on the corner, it's got massive history to it, First Pres, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, to me, just having it there at the end of the day makes sense from the perspective of a tool in a toolbox. When you need that tool, if you don't have it, you're out of luck.
And I have a hard time even thinking of more than 2 or 3 properties in all Littleton that this would even apply to at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And those people who own those, I don't even see wanting to, but you never know down the future.
So, council, is there any opposition? Go ahead, Jerry.
One of the cases. I think if we knew exactly what properties we were talking about, 1 or 2, whatever it may be, I think that would be very helpful for me at least. Because I know when we talked about the courthouse, that was a public building, and it was, for the most part, rehabbed with public money. Now we're talking about some private piece of property. So if I knew, what properties.
But I think
we
the
were
only
talking
2
about,
examples
that
I
would be
could
helpful.
come up with off the top of my head would be the Little House or, the Carmelite Monastery, for example.
But they're not talking.
No, but what if a developer came in instead?
Carmelites, they don't talk.
Very good. Actually, Bill Hoppy met with them and has dispelled the rumor that they're very pleasant.
There is
And there is a designated talker.
Yes. Take the right notes.
Yes.
And it would be a shame to see that demolished. That's why I would rather see if something was identified. I don't like going into this not knowing what's identified and say, let's have this just in case as a tool. But if we knew what we were talking about.
Well, I'm not sure.
That's a different.
At the end of the day, you can always identify that, Elvis's home was just a home until Elvis lived there. What if we have something down, who knows, 10, 15, 20 years
Amended.
down the road?
It can be amended.
your house, Jerry.
Yeah, your house, for example.
I'm putting a plaque up where a few of us hang out on my front porch. To be brass. But that could still be amended, could it not, Kev, and added?
All we were tasked with, at least in this, was trying to identify a criteria that this measure could be applied that was strict, as opposed to arbitrary the way it is in the code right now.
And I'm not sure you'd in fact want to have some type of a code where if an issue came up and you then hurried up to create and craft the legislation to prevent that from happening, then Kirsten, should be raising her hand over there, because that's when you are moving.
But the city has done that in the past. They did that with the Marathon property. Because there was rumor that there was going to become a church, or somebody was going to buy that property, if you remember. So there was emergency meetings with council, and they put it, I believe they changed the code somehow. Who was here then? Jim, you were here then. It's when Osterville and all you were on the board. But they made it so that it could not become a particular use at that time.
We haven't recommended saving the Marathon property.
Okay, we're
Anyway,
leaving.
good.
So let's counsel, Peggy?
Yeah, I sound like I might be the only dissenter. I have difficulty with saying that we could do something that the owner did not want us to do, particularly when our attorney says it would probably almost never be overturned on appeal by a judge. Maybe it would, maybe not, but to pretty much have that standard is not good to me. I think if there's something that important to the community, if the community can't convince the person, then maybe there's something wrong with the way we try to convince. On the other hand, sometimes I'm pretty stubborn, and people can't convince me of something. Heaven help me, and everybody else, but I'm just not comfortable with it.
Okay. So, at this point, let's kind of just weigh in if we want to move forward with the recommendation. I guess we're just saying Kevin's white paper on this. Show of hands who want to move forward with Kevin's reco. Jim? Okay. So that's 4. Jim, did you have? No. Caveat, okay. Glenn?
Mayor, last one's list of merit, and the reason this is on the list is because previously the list of merit had a standard that came with it, and that was anybody who had a property on the list of merit had a 30-day wait applied to any building permit that they brought forward. I think the council and the board agree that that 30 days should go away, and I think what we heard from the board was they'd like to retain the list as more of an advocacy, outreach, education type of list.
I have one question regarding something Kevin said, and this was not my understanding. He indicated that it was a 30-day demo.
Well,
That it was for
permit,
demolition. I understood it was for just a 30-day permit, even for a reno.
It's for anything.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's for a renovation
Yeah.
or scrape, anything?
Anything.
Okay.
And at the end of the 30 days, they can still do that regardless, so.
Okay. You are recommending that the 30-day goes away?
Right, and the reason for that is twofold. One is that isn't tied to the deed of the property right now, so it comes as a surprise. So basically, the list of merit as it stands right now, the number of buildings that we have on it would be taken away and scraped off, and we'd have to start from scratch, and then get people's consent to do that. We thought that was sort of arduous on because the work's already been done recognizing these properties, and that to leave the list where it is and then use it as an educational tool to expand. Now, the city, on occasion in the past, has written letters to people saying, we've recognized your building. If you want to explore historic preservation or talk to us about it or designate your property, feel free. But, that's, and then we want to continue to do that and maybe expand it to just let people know that they have a historic asset that's been recognized, not only by the city, but by historic surveys that have been done in the past.
Okay. Council, any questions? Are we okay with recommendations for Main Street? Okay. Glenn?
That's it, Mayor.
That's it? Anything else?
Oh, it's been very enjoyable, actually.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for all your hard work on this.
Thank you.
For all the hard work you're about to do.
And recognition to Historic Littleton, Inc. and our members that are present here.
And Council, we have one last order of business.
Kevin, you do know you're stepping down.
I've heard
We have a lot of work over there.
We'll just let everybody clear out.
Kevin, I did mention that at the last council meeting.
So, okay, Council, we need to open our special meeting. Roll call.
Mayor Brinkman,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stallman, Councilmember Cole,
Here.
Councilmember Beckman,
Here.
Councilmember Valdez,
Here.
Councilmember Cernanik,
Present.
Councilmember Taylor.
Okay. Council, we are on item 2A, approval of boards and commission appointments. And I'm not going to read all the boards and commission appointments. I have confirmed they are the ones that we did make.
Excuse me.
No.
I have one correction. It's really just an addition. In the licensing authority, since Susan Price left, did council want to move Christopher Forrest to a regular position and Ann Mather to the alternate one, or do you want to wait until we go through the process?
I would say we move the alternates up. She resigned.
Yes, she did.
Before.
Yes, she did.
Yes. And that would naturally have
I just
occurred.
wanted to make sure that we included that
Okay.
in this. I'll add it, but I wanted to make sure we included it.
Okay, and then we will be conducting separate application process and interviews for another
Yes,
member
ma'am.
on the board. Okay. Any discussion or questions?
Is there going to be any other applications besides licensing authority? Did we decide not to do the fine arts?
Fine arts, I think we were holding on because there may be some tweaking.
Wait till your
That would-
study
that
gets
would-
done.
That would make sense to hold
Okay.
it, yes.
So it is just licensing at this point? Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
I move to reappoint and appoint to boards and commissions the following that was attached with the addition for the licensing authority of moving Christopher Forrest to regular and Ann Mather to first alternate.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Council, all in favor, raise your hand.
The vote is
We
7,
have-
the vote is unanimous.
Sorry. Sorry. No, I was going to do your job. Okay. That is all the business this evening. We're adjourned.